Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam and I will be moderating today's discussion. We are pleased to have Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, joining us each week to give us a briefing on the top events currently going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will speak for 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A from the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Avnaf, and good evening from Israel. When I first wrote the title of this week's webinar about the challenge and what it could mean about Hezbollah and Iran attacking Israel, I almost fully expected that to be in the past tense by now. There was a feeling that the attacks were imminent over Saturday, Shabbat. There was a feeling that the attacks were imminent. We even heard voices coming out of the US, I think it was late last week that, or even towards the end of the week, that within 48 hours, the attacks would start one way or another. I think Secretary of State Blinken even alluded to that. But we are still here, and the attacks, neither from Hezbollah in the north or Iran in the east, have taken place, or at least not to a significant amount, and certainly not what the so-called response to the assassinations last week of number two, the chief of staff of Hezbollah in Beirut, and the assassination attributed to Israel by the Iranians and others of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of the political bureau of Hamas, in the heart of Tehran, in a Revolutionary Guards compound on the eve of the inauguration of the new president. Hugely embarrassing for the Iranians, and because of that, they have called for revenge, that Israel must be punished, etc., etc. The thing I should say at this point is, as opposed to the attacks in April, really no one knows. There's just pure speculation from wall to wall in the US, in European capitals, in Arab capitals, in the region, even in Israel. I mean, it's there may be some people who know something or have some ideas, but usually these things are leaked, usually these things come out, and it doesn't seem like we're any the wiser to understand when these attacks will take place and the length and depth, how brutal or not they may be. Both Hezbollah and Iran have said that as a result of these assassinations, they're going to go harder than they would before. Iran has said that it will respond more forcefully than the April attacks, and Hezbollah are talking about certainly going much further than the attacks, which have pretty much been just in the north, mostly against military targets for the last 10 months. That's the first thing to keep in mind. So everything I talk about from this moment on is speculation, it's opinion, it's analysis, but no one really knows at this point. I fully expected that there could be a possibility that we'd be holding this webinar as rockets were flying above, maybe in my safe room, etc., etc. But here we are. It hasn't happened yet. It could even happen tomorrow. There is, again, everyone is floundering around looking for little signs, and one of those signs that people are possibly pointing to tonight is in the early hours of tomorrow morning, Thursday morning. Egypt have called on its airlines not to fly in or anywhere near Iranian airspace. Now, they've claimed that it's perfectly innocent, nothing to do with anything else, but that seems a little bit less likely. But again, we just don't know. The big question from the Israeli leadership, both political and military, are a number of questions. First of all, whether they need to put Israelis on standby, long-term or medium-term, or whether they just need to tell them a few hours in advance when they know. There's been major discussions on the home front about exactly what to do, major meetings of the home front, and there's been lots of training exercises, not just the military, but also medical facilities have done a lot of training exercises over the last few days. There's even been talk, or there was earlier in the week, of creating some sort of tent cities in the south of Israel. Ironically, there was talk of having places like Sderot and Netivot perhaps becoming places of evacuation for those in the center of Israel, like Tel Aviv. And if we know these places, Sderot in particular, was the place which was most under attack for the last number of years, and obviously it was attacked on October 7th. So there has been a lot of planning. The government and the spokespeople have been under great strains to not show any panic, and that's pretty much seen in the streets of Israel, which has pretty much gone about its business as normal. I myself attended a soccer match with my son yesterday. There was no talk of postponing it or putting it off, even though everyone in the stadium knew that at one point, we could be under fire. And they even gave instructions at least twice during the game that if there should be a siren, exactly what to do. The earlier indications of when a strike could happen pointed to a Jewish event next week, Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of the Jewish month of Av. For those who do not know, it is the day where Jews around the world commemorate the fall of the two temples and also many other Jewish tragedies that occurred on that day. There was talk, at least, that the Iranians understood the significance and the symbolism of such a day, and that could play into the fact that they could deliver a more psychological blow on such a sad occasion. But again, this was speculation earlier than we haven't heard since, but the fact that it hasn't happened up until now means that certainly that day could still be looked at. What we do know is that the US and other Western allies have been on a major diplomatic push to try and push the Iranians back from the brink, to try and explain to them, or threaten, if you will, why they should not do an attack. And if they do, it should be a lot softer, milder. We've seen a massive military presence, a massive military buildup with significant air power, sea power moving to the region, much of it defensive, but not only. It's largely a show of force. It's highly unlikely that all this weaponry will be used in an offensive way against Iran or any of its allies, even though American troops have been under attack in Iraq over the last few days from Shiite groups, again, aligned with Iran. But it is a show of force. It's an impressive show of force. And according, again, to some analyses, that has given Iran pause for thought exactly what it should do. Interestingly enough, while we saw some significant US military figures come to the region, and we know that Defense Secretary Austin and Defense Minister in Israel, Gallant, have been on the phone constantly, several times a day, and we've got readouts from those, and it basically just it takes the same position that the Americans will, it's non-negotiable, that Israel's security should be in question. It will do everything to defend it, and as we've seen, it's not just words, it's also in actions. As this was happening in parallel, interestingly enough, I think it's the head of the National Security Council of the Russian Federation, someone very, very close to President Vladimir Putin, was in Iran. And there were a lot of questions exactly what that means. First of all, for anyone who still believes that what's going on in the region is not being played out on a major global geopolitical level, and we'll just have to see some of these meetings. It's clear that there are opportunities on both sides, and the Russians are certainly taking advantage of the situation. But also it has been suggested that the Russians are bringing in, and according to at least something that I saw, that many Russian deliveries by air came into Tehran or Iran this week. It suggested that it's probably to bolster Iran's air defenses against a possible Israeli attack, and that certainly does change the scenarios a little bit, because Iran does have a relatively impressive air defense system. Certainly Russia's is more impressive, even though it's, again, not at the same level of Israel's or even the US. But again, we see it was very symbolic. While senior American defense and security officials were in Israel, we see the Russians in Iran clearly taking sides, and clearly there's something going on at a far greater scale. The other thing that has really come out of the last couple of days is from an Israeli standpoint, whereas Iran's threats are being taken extremely seriously, what is being taken even more seriously is the threat from the north, the threat from Hezbollah. Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, has come out many times and said that we will hit them harder. The question is, again, what exactly it will do. At the moment, as we know, the last number of months, it's largely, not solely, but largely attacking military sites and relatively evacuated areas of the north. It hasn't gone beyond a certain point. So the questions on the table, exactly what it will do. Will it target civilian centers, which if there should be civilian casualties from the Israeli side, that will certainly, in the words of Defense Minister Gallant and others, will up the ante, and Israel will make not just Hezbollah, but Lebanon pay. Or will it will it attack military installations or military sites further south? The question also, which has been asked for a number of weeks, is will Iran, or maybe even Hezbollah, will it be enough for them if they can manage to target some Israelis or some sort of Israeli symbol abroad? Again, embassies are under extremely high alert. Ambassadors are being, protected far beyond what they were even a few weeks ago. So all of these things are being weighed up. What Iran, and to a certain extent Hezbollah, have to do is they have to show that they are responding. They have to show that it's a greater response than they've used before, but probably neither of them at this point, it seems, Iran or Hezbollah, want what's been described as an all-out war. Hezbollah, as I've said for a long time, they're not interested in all-out war, and I think that still stands, but they will have to respond forcefully. Then number two, the chief of staff of the Hezbollah, someone very close to Nasrallah, was assassinated in the middle of Beirut. They will have to save face. They will have to respond. They also have to take into account the fact that there's a lot of anger in Lebanon against Hezbollah at this point. So probably they won't want to drag Lebanon into a war. But again, like we had in Majdan al-Shams, there could be a major miscalculation which could, in the end, lead to that war. But most Israeli political and security officials are certainly more worried about the north, and also because of its proximity. Hezbollah is literally on the border of Israel. It can reach Tel Aviv a lot quicker than Tehran can. So that's probably where most attention, but not all attention at this point, is facing. Also the fact that there are all these anti-missile capabilities from the US and other allies in the region, which obviously is not the case on Israel's northern border. Then we move on to the question that, in the words of Rahm Emanuel, never let a crisis be wasted. There's always an opportunity. It's clear that the US is going to want something for this backing, for this security enhancement in the face of these threats from Tehran. And what seems to be taking place is there's been a lot of pressure from the top, President Biden, on Prime Minister Netanyahu to moderate his stance on the hostage deal. And it seems like, again, according to reports coming out of the US, we saw Kirby say that we're as close to an agreement as we ever have, and there's a lot of optimism on the US side, and they're trying to push both sides to this agreement, and they're going to try and use the time after these attacks from Hezbollah and Iran, as long as they do not go into that all-out war, to try and finally end this, because there's a feeling if you end it in Gaza, there's a hostage release, a ceasefire, then Hezbollah will fall into line. That's what they've said many times. And that's what they're really hoping, because certainly the Americans do not want this war to continue. They want it as contained as possible. They do not want it to become a regional war, which obviously one major hit on the Israeli civilian center from either side could lead to that war. On another note, we heard this week the election of Yahya Sinwar to the head of the Hamas political bureau. That was a position held by Ismail Haniyeh until his assassination. It's significant on many levels. First of all, we are finally, if most people around the world would not necessarily see the difference, but now we can put away any of this sort of symbolic difference of separation between the political and the military bureau, because they're both invested now in the same person. Before there was this idea, and certainly major media outlets tried to paint Ismail Haniyeh as some sort of moderate, as a politician, as a diplomat. The fact that it's now in the hands of the bloodthirsty Sinwar, the architect of October 7th, there is no longer even that pretension or that guise that there is a separation. What it also tells us is it was a victory within Hamas for the pro-Iran section over the pro-Qatari section, which was led by Khaled Mashal, who was at least a candidate, perhaps to take over. But the fact that Sinwar, who's certainly more in line with Iran, has a better relationship with Iran, shows that the pro-Iranian wing is working. It also really puts the emphasis on this sort of overseas leadership back into Gaza itself. And it's important because now there's really only one pressure point. Before, with Haniyeh in Qatar, there was pressure from the Americans on the Qataris to try and make a deal. Now that pressure will be far less, because they don't really have as many pressure points on Sinwar, who is hiding in Gaza, according to Israeli analyses. There are some who suggest that this actually could even be a move by some in Hamas, knowing that there's a good chance that Sinwar will not see out this war. That's certainly debatable. And if Israel were to assassinate him, that would take out the major part of the Hamas leadership and allow some of the more quote-unquote moderate elements to take over and shape and stake a new path for Hamas, perhaps having some role in Gaza afterwards. I'm not so sure about this, but this is certainly a point of view that I've heard over the last week. Just one last thing that was going on in Israel this week. We had history. For the first time ever, Israeli call-up papers were sent out to members of the ultra-Orthodox community, and there was even a day of enlistment. I think there was about 1,500 sent out, and there was an expectation of at least 400 ultra-Orthodox members of the ultra-Orthodox community turning up to the enlistment centers to start their army service. In the end, it was less than 50. Part of it was the fact that hundreds of extreme ultra-Orthodox men came and demonstrated. When I say demonstrated, it was more like a riot. And even on the second day itself, they broke into an army base itself and ran riot. This may have put off a lot of people that may have indicated before that they were prepared to do their service. So on the one hand, history was made after 75 years or 76 years or whatever it is. For the first time, ultra-Orthodox young men were sent enlistment orders, and some of them came. But the fact that it was far, far lower numbers than previously thought is going to certainly mean that many people have to start thinking again, is this the best way forward? And what sanctions could be taken, if at all? And what could be done to try and improve those numbers in the future? And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the update, Ashley. I will start with a question from Burak Korkmaz, who asks, do you think any hostage deal is possible in the near future with a Sinwar-led Hamas?
Yes, there is. Sinwar is in trouble, despite CNN's analysis this week that Israel has only taken out fully three of the 24 Hamas military units throughout the Gaza Strip. It's clear that a lot more are either destroyed or damaged. Sinwar really isn't going to win this war Eventually, Israel will get to more and more of them. Yes, there can be new recruits, but these are young, inexperienced. The chain of leadership has gone, a lot of it. So Sinwar is in a difficult situation. What the one wild card that he's hoping for, and that's why I don't see any deal being done or even moving forward in the next few days, is he'll want to see what the response from Iran and Hezbollah is. What his hope was from October 7th onwards, or even before when he was planning this, was that the massacre would lead to something more regional, because he knew that Hamas on their own could not really deal Israel. It dealt Israel a terrible blow on October 7th, but on a military level, it is not able to really deal a major blow. But if you pulls in Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis, other Shiite groups, Syria, then perhaps there's more chance of greater achievements. That hasn't happened. But maybe, again, depending on the length, depth, breadth, timing, and most importantly, the possible number of casualties that come from these attacks, maybe Sinwar will finally get his dream, and that means that a hostage deal will be pushed further away. If these attacks come and go without too much beyond it, then Sinwar may be again back against the wall and may be thinking that the only way to survive this and to get out of this is to a hostage deal.
Great, thank you. Now, as Israel is awaiting a imminent attack from Iran, how are the Israelis coordinating with the Arab states in the region?
Well, there's been a lot of behind the scenes diplomacy. Largely, it's being led by the Americans and other Western allies, because many of the Arab leaders certainly don't want to be seen as being patsies for Israel or in the service of Israel. Jordan, for example, has said that Iran, again, they didn't use the word Iran. They said that no one should use our airspace at all on either side. And that's a message to the Iranians. And that was probably as a result of American pressure. Obviously, Iran doesn't need Saudi Arabia. Iran basically can fire over Iraq. That's not a problem for them. Jordan is obviously a problem. Syria is less of a problem. So really, the fact that Jordan and even Egypt, again, they don't really need to come over Egypt, but Egypt have said also that they do not want the airspace being used. So it's clear that Iran has been sent messages that the Arab world is not lining up behind it, even though it has tried to, largely through the Islamic Organization of Islamic States. But there is, apart from the Iranian proxies themselves in the countries where Iran has a lot of influence, most of the other nations are certainly not lining up in any way, shape, or form in support of Iran.
All right, thank you. Now, Mario Fleck would like to ask, why doesn't Israel call Lebanon as a country to take care and take responsibility for Hezbollah's actions? At the end of the day, Israel has civilian areas being bombed from Lebanon.
Well, I mean, in a sense, it has. Israel doesn't have diplomatic relations with Lebanon. So most of the discussions are through third-party states, whether it's through the US, through Amos Hochstein, who has been back and forth over the last few months trying to get some sort of agreement, some sort of ceasefire on the border. The French are very involved because of their historic role in Lebanon. And certainly the messages have been sent. And the truth is that many Lebanese leaders, either publicly or privately, are certainly telling Hezbollah, stop dragging us into this war. We cannot handle this. We do not want to see it. And they know that Israel has the capability to wreak a lot of destruction and chaos in Lebanon. And many of the non-Shiite supporters of Hezbollah are certainly against what Hezbollah are doing, and would certainly prefer that this war, cease immediately.
Thank you. Now, how have the recent assassinations of senior Hamas and Hezbollah leaders affected their operations and their strategic planning capabilities?
Well, I mean, we can just go by what Hassan Nasrallah said, that it is a blow. he was very close with his number two in his organization, who was his great strategist. Some say he even had more of a day-to-day role in the running of Hezbollah, whereas Hassan Nasrallah is the spiritual leader, he's the head. He's been underground for many, many years. He doesn't do any public appearances, live public appearances, I should say. He records speeches all the time. But so he even admitted that it certainly hurt the organization, but he said that we'll be able to replace him, within Hezbollah. Hamas, certainly the assassination of Mohammed Deif was a big blow, also symbolically, because Deif, even more than Sinwar, is probably the most respected military leader in Hamas, largely due to the fact that Israel tried to assassinate him many, many times, and he always seemed to escape. Hania is less important from a practical point of view. This is a man who was a multi-billionaire living in Qatar, hadn't visited the Strip in a while, was seen as extremely distant from the general Palestinian population in Gaza, but symbolically it was very important. And the fact that things have now all moved to Sinwar in the Strip is also now very significant, because that moves the leadership from outside into the Strip itself, for all the reasons that I said. But Hamas is in disarray. They haven't got a very organized command. Yes, they are still fighting. Yes, they're trying to regroup. Yes, they're trying to recruit. But a lot of the senior military leaders in Hamas have been killed. And it's easy to replace, the average soldier on the streets relatively, but it's certainly harder to replace a major strategic military thinker like Deif and like some of the others that Israel's taken out over the last few months. So certainly Hamas are in disarray. Are they defeated? No, but they're certainly on their way to defeat. But Hezbollah, the assassination, will be a blow, but they are far more well organized fighting army. This is not just a terrorist group. This is an army with a chain of command. There will be other people who will be able to come in who are privy to much of the capabilities of Hezbollah. So probably in the long run, it won't make much of an effect, but still, it's still an important tactic through any war to try and assassinate the leadership, especially the military leadership of your enemy. So it is a blow, as Nasrallah conceded, but it's not going to mean that Hezbollah is going to be any less of a functioning army.
All right. Thank you. I think we have time for one more here. Jack Wasserman would like to ask, has the appointment of two new military commanders for the North and South made any difference?
I mean, there was sort of some controversy of a new commander in the North who's taking a far more belligerent tone during one of his earlier speeches. But again, it's significant to a point, because at the end of the day, the decisions are made by the political level in Israel. And let's not forget the chief of staff, the IDF chief of staff, Halevi, is still in position. There is a deep debate in Israel, and it's happening on an hourly basis all over, exactly what needs to be done with the IDF since October 7th, and certainly moving forward, because there is a feeling that they failed, that they didn't understand the situation, that they pushed for a certain strategy from the political level, and the top levels, the top echelons of the army is still full of the same way of thinking, that we can deter the enemy through non-military means, or try and embolden them and make sure that they do not attack us. So probably won't have a major effect. Probably only after the war we'll start seeing some major sort of house cleaning within the IDF, maybe even the political level. That's what everyone is sort of waiting to see, because there is this feeling in the middle of war, you don't really make too many replacements. That's why we haven't seen the resignation of the IDF chief of staff. We did see the resignation of the head of intelligence in the IDF, but we did not see of Mossad and some others. So it's clear that at this point in time, sort of rallying the flag, and we have to stick with what we have, but I'm sure we'll see a lot more cleaning house after the war's finished.
Okay, thank you. Now, unfortunately, we have reached the end of our podcast for the week. I apologize for not being able to get to all the questions. We had quite a few of them just flooding in towards the end there. Ashley, I want to thank you again for taking the time to update us this week.
Thank you very much.
Of course. And for our viewers and listeners, please be on the lookout for our weekly podcast offerings email coming out over this weekend. We thank you all again for joining us and for your participation, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks.